The Empty Seat tells the story of Jaden Lewis, a young student navigating the subtle dynamics of exclusion in his classroom. A particular seat in the classroom has been left intentionally empty all week, signaling an unspoken boundary enforced by his peers. As Jaden faces whispers, hesitation, and subtle judgment, he learns that courage isn't always loud. It can be as simple as claiming the space that is rightfully yours. By sitting in the empty seat and quietly asserting his presence, Jaden begins to challenge the invisible barriers in his school. This story explores the ways microaggressions, bias, and social exclusion affect children, while showing how small, thoughtful acts of bravery and visibility can shift perspectives. The Empty Seat encourages empathy, inclusion, and the power of standing firm in one's identity.
Jaden Lewis slung his weathered backpack over his shoulder, the weight of his textbooks pressing into his spine, a physical manifestation of the day ahead. As he stepped into room 302, the low hum of early morning chatter hit him like a physical wall. It was a chaotic symphony of teenage life, the frantic scratching of pens on last-minute homework, the rhythmic snapping of gum, and the digital pings of notifications. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a relentless, medicinal flickering that always gave Jaden a slight headache by second period. Pale spring sunlight filtered through the tall, grime-streaked windows, casting long, rectangular shadows across the linoleum. To anyone else, it was just a classroom. To Jaden, it was a minefield of social codes he hadn't helped write, but was forced to follow. He paused just inside the doorway, his fingers tightening on his backpack strap. Scanning the rows was a ritual of survival. Finding a seat should have been the easiest part of the day, a thoughtless 5-second task, but lately it felt like a tactical maneuver. His stomach tightened the moment he noticed it. The empty seat. It sat in the dead center of the middle row. It was a standard-issue desk with a laminate wood top and a chrome frame, perfectly positioned for a clear view of the whiteboard. By all accounts, it was the prime real estate of the classroom. Yet it remained an island. While students squeezed 3 to a table in the back or crowded the sides to be near their friends, this specific chair remained untouched. No stray notebooks rested on its surface. No North Face backpacks leaned against its legs. It looked normal, but Jaden knew it was radioactive. He remembered the whispers from Tuesday. He had been tying his shoe in the hallway when he heard Tyler and Marcus near the lockers. "You gonna sit in the center today?" Tyler had smirked. "Nah, man," Marcus replied, glancing back toward the door where Jaden stood. "Better to leave that seat open. Keeps things orderly." They never said his name, but the subtext was written in the way they cleared a path for him in the halls, not out of respect, but as if they were afraid his presence was contagious. Jaden wasn't new. He had been here since August. He was a varsity track runner, a solid B+ student, and a person who stayed out of trouble. But in this town, in this specific year, his skin color made him a permanent other. Jaden took a quiet, steadying breath, the scent of floor wax and old paper filling his lungs. He walked past the center row, feeling the microscopic shift in the room's energy as he passed. He chose a seat in the far back corner, wedged between a broken radiator and a stack of dusty encyclopedias. As he sat, he felt that familiar mixture of frustration and bone-deep exhaustion. He pulled out his notebook, hoping the teacher would arrive before the silence became unbearable. Chapter 2. The Assignment. Mrs. Clark entered the room with her usual brisk energy, a stack of graded essays balanced precariously in one arm. She was a woman who seemed built of sharp angles and soft intentions, her bright red glasses perched on the bridge of a nose that had seen plenty of history. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice cutting through the remaining chatter. "Clear your desks. We're moving from the industrial era into something much more personal." The room settled. The sound of sliding phones and zipping bags echoed. Mrs. Clark clapped her hands, a sharp crack that signaled the start of work. Today, we begin our deep dive into the civil rights movement. This isn't just about dates and names. It's about the courage it takes to demand space in a world that wants to keep you small. Jaden felt a prickle of heat on the back of his neck. "For this project, you will work in pairs," Mrs. Clark continued. "I want you to look at the person next to you. If there's an empty space, fill it. This project requires collaboration." A ripple of movement spread. It was the partner dance, the frantic eye contact between friends, the silent mouthing of "us?" But as the pairs formed, a void remained. Every student near the middle row seemed to develop a sudden, intense interest in their own shoelaces. They looked at the empty seat, then at Jaden in the back, then quickly away. The silence grew heavy, thick with the unsaid. Jaden stared at a scratch on his desk, tracing the wood grain with his thumb. He expected to work alone. He was used to being his own partner. Then, the screech of metal on linoleum broke the tension. Connor, a quiet boy from the front row known mostly for his oversized hoodies and talent in art class, stood up. He didn't look at the popular kids in the back. He didn't look at the floor. He just picked up his messenger bag and walked toward the center row. "I guess I'll sit here?" Connor said. His voice wasn't loud, but in the vacuum of the room, it sounded like a shout. He dropped into the forbidden seat with a casual thud. Mrs. Clark's eyes softened behind her red frames. "Excellent, Connor. Jaden, why don't you move down? It'll be easier to share the research materials." Jaden froze. The walk from the back corner to the center row felt like a mile. He stood, his knees feeling strangely weak, and navigated the narrow aisle. As he sat beside Connor, he could feel the weight of 24 pairs of eyes. He could practically hear the gears turning in his classmates' heads. Connor didn't make it weird. He just flipped open a fresh page in his sketchbook. "So, civil rights. That's a big topic. Where do you want to start? The bus boycotts or the lunch counters?" Jaden looked at Connor, really looked at him. Connor wasn't a hero. He looked nervous, his fingers twitching slightly. But he was there. "The lunch counters," Jaden whispered. "Let's start there."
Chapter 3. The Whispers. The research phase was a slow immersion into a mirror of their own reality. For 3 days, Jaden and Connor sat side by side, surrounded by books on Jim Crow laws, black and white photos of snarling dogs, and maps of the Deep South. "Okay," Connor said on Wednesday, leaning over a shared iPad. "I've got the legislative side. I'm looking at Brown versus Board of Education. You want to handle the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee?" "I'm already on it," Jaden said, showing him a list of names he'd compiled. They worked well together. Connor had an eye for the visual layout, sketching out how their poster would look, while Jaden was a vacuum for facts, finding the small details that made the history feel human. But as they bonded over history, the present kept intruding. From the desk behind them, Jaden caught snatches of a conversation. "Actually sitting there, can you believe it? Connor's such a weirdo. Why would he choose that? Maybe he just wants a better grade." The comments were like paper cuts, small, stinging, and constant. Jaden watched Connor's ears turn pink. He knew Connor heard them. "I don't get," Connor muttered suddenly, slamming a heavy textbook shut. The sound made the girl in the row over jump. "What get?" Jaden asked, though he already knew. Connor lowered his voice, leaning in so only Jaden could hear. "I don't get why they're acting like we're sitting on a bed of nails. It's a chair, Jaden. It's just a piece of plastic and metal. Why do they care so much?" Jaden looked at the desk, then at his own hands. "It's not the chair, Connor. It's what the chair represents. If you sit next to me, you're saying the invisible rules are stupid, and people hate being told their rules are stupid." Connor frowned, his brow furrowed in genuine frustration. "Well, they are stupid. It's 2026. This shouldn't be a statement. It should just be Tuesday." Jaden felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so long being the subject of the rules that he'd forgotten how absurd they looked to someone who refused to follow them. "Yeah," Jaden said, a small, genuine smile tugging at his lips. "It should just be Tuesday." Chapter 4: A Lesson in Courage. The cafeteria was the ultimate test. It was a cavernous room filled with the smell of a mystery meat and industrial cleaner, divided into territories as rigid as any ancient kingdom. Jaden usually sat at the very end of a long table near the exit, a spot that allowed him to disappear the moment he finished eating. On Thursday, he watched the empty seat phenomenon play out in real time. A group of freshmen approached a table where a black girl was sitting alone. There were 6 empty seats around her. The freshmen looked at the seats, looked at each other, and then walked to the other side of the room to sit on the floor. It wasn't malice, it was a lack of imagination. They couldn't imagine breaking the pattern. When Jaden returned to history class, he found the room in a transition period. Mrs. Clark was setting up a projector. The middle row was empty again. The seat Connor had occupied was vacant because Connor had been called to the office. Jaden stood at the edge of the row. He felt the old instinct to drift toward the back, to the safety of the broken radiator. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, rhythmic pulse. "Just a seat," he told himself. "It's just a seat." He didn't walk to the back. He walked to the center. He pulled the chair out, the sound of the legs scraping the floor sounding like a trumpet blast to his ears. He sat down, alone. The girl who had been whispering the day before, Sarah, was standing nearby. She stopped mid-sentence, her mouth slightly open. "Isn't that where you and Connor were?" she asked, her voice hovering between judgment and genuine confusion. Jaden looked up. He didn't scowl. He didn't look away. He simply met her eyes with a calm, steady gaze. "Yeah," he said gently. "It's a good seat. You can see everything from here. Why shouldn't I sit here?" Sarah blinked. She looked at the seat next to him, the one Connor had used, and then back at Jaden. For a second, the invisible barrier wavered. She didn't sit down, but she didn't move away either. She just stood there, processing the fact that the world hadn't ended because Jaden Lewis was sitting in the middle of the room.
Chapter 5: Small Shifts. Friday arrived with a change in the weather, a cool breeze that seemed to sweep through the hallways. In room 302, the atmosphere had shifted from heavy to cautious. The empty seat wasn't empty anymore. When Connor returned from the office, he reclaimed his spot next to Jaden. But something else happened. A student named David, who usually sat in the far front, moved his desk back a few inches to be closer to their island so he could ask about their bibliography format. Hey, Jaden, David said, keeping his voice casual. Did you guys find that source on the Montgomery bus boycott? I can't find the primary document. Check the Library of Congress digital archives, Jaden replied, pointing to a link on his screen. I can email it to you if you want. That'd be awesome, thanks. It was a 30-second interaction. It was mundane. It was perfect. By the middle of the period, the buffer zone, the ring of empty desks that usually surrounded Jaden, had shrunk. People were moving. The whispers had transitioned from, "Why are they sitting there?" to, "Did you see their poster? The artwork is insane." During the last 10 minutes of class, a girl named Maya accidentally sat in a chair right behind Jaden while looking for a highlighter. She realized where she was, froze for a split second, and then she stayed. She opened her book and started reading. Jaden caught Connor's eye. Connor gave a microscopic nod. The radioactivity was fading. The seat was just a seat again.
Chapter 6. Reflection. That night, Jaden sat in the quiet of his bedroom. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the soft scratching of his pen. He kept a journal, usually filled with track times and grocery lists, but tonight the words flowed differently. The empty seat felt like it belonged to someone else, he wrote, the ink dark against the white paper. It felt like a ghost was sitting there or a warning sign, but really, it belonged to me the whole time. I just had to claim it. He stared at the words. It wasn't a chair that was missing from this class, he continued. It was courage. Not the kind of courage you see in movies with explosions and shouting, just the quiet kind, the kind that lets you sit down when everyone else is standing up. He realized that for months he had been waiting for permission to exist in the center of the room. He had been waiting for a sign that he was welcome. But Connor had shown him that sometimes you don't wait for the door to be opened. You just walk through it. Visibility is a double-edged sword, Jaden thought. It makes you a target, but it also makes you a landmark. If I sit there, maybe the next person won't have to think twice about it. Maybe the invisible rules only work if we all agree to keep our eyes shut. He closed the journal, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt since the school year began.
Chapter 7. Recognition. Monday was presentation day. The classroom was transformed into a gallery of history. Poster boards were propped up on every surface, covered in photos of Dr. King, Malcolm X, and the nameless thousands who marched for dignity. When Mrs. Clark called Jaden and Connor to the front, the room went silent. But it wasn't the cold silence of the previous week. It was a silence of expectation. Connor spoke first, his voice steady as he explained the legal intricacies of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He pointed to his drawings, detailed, evocative sketches of people waiting in long lines to cast a ballot. Then it was Jaden's turn. He didn't look at his notes. He looked at his classmates. History isn't just something that happened a long time ago in the South, Jaden said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. It happens every time we decide who gets to belong and who has to stay in the back. It happens in cafeterias and classrooms. It happens in the seats we choose to leave empty. He saw Sarah lean forward. He saw David nod. When they finished, the applause wasn't polite. It was vigorous. Mrs. Clark stood in the back, her red glasses reflecting the light. "Excellent work," she said, her voice thick with pride. "You didn't just report on history, you understood the spirit of it. And I have to say, looking around this room today, I see a different group of students than I saw last Monday. I see people sharing space. I see a community."
As Jaden walked back to his desk, he noticed something that brought a lump to his throat. A new student, a transfer who had just arrived that morning, was sitting in the chair right next to his. The student looked up and smiled. "Is the seat taken?" the boy asked. Jaden smiled back, dropping his bag and sliding into his own chair. "Not anymore. It's all yours." The project was over, but the change remained. Jaden realized that the most powerful thing you can do in a world that wants you to move is to simply stay put, to show up, to be seen, and to choose, with quiet and unshakable resolve, to sit down.
Moral of the story. The story teaches that real change often begins with small acts of courage. Sometimes, something as simple as sitting in a seat that others avoid can challenge unfair social rules. When one person chooses kindness and fairness, like Connor did, and another chooses confidence and self-respect, like Jaden did, it can inspire others to rethink their behavior. It also shows that invisible social barriers exist only as long as people continue to follow them. When someone dares to question them, those barriers begin to break. If this story meant something to you, if Jaden's courage, Connor's quiet support, and that once empty seat made you think a little differently about the world, then don't let the story end here. Stories grow the same way courage does, when people pass them on. So before you leave, like this video to show that messages about kindness and inclusion matter. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that even small actions can change a room. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories that inspire, challenge, and spark new ways of thinking. Because sometimes all it takes to start a change is one person, one story, and one seat that refuses to stay empty.